Gilligan's Island was one of the most watched and beloved sitcoms of the 60s, but it came to an end earlier than expected as a result of favoritism at the CBS network in favor of the Western series Gunsmoke. Although it ended only after 3 seasons, the series was later revived in the form of various made-for-TV features. The final episode was its 98th, called Gilligan the Goddess. The episode revolved around the plot of a native chief trying to take one of the show's iconic castaways as his bride. Join Facts First as we explore the scene that took Gilligan's Island off the air. On April 17, 1967, the final episode of Gilligan's Island premiered on CBS. The episode's name was Gilligan the Goddess, and it was the last episode of the show's 3rd season. The show is expected to be renewed for a 4th, to the point where many of the show's cast members had bought new houses closer to the studio. But favoritism from within the studio ended up causing Gilligan's Island to end its run early. After only 3 seasons, it was over by the summer of 1967. Given the fact that the creative team behind Gilligan's Island didn't even realize that Gilligan the Goddess would be the final episode, the episode didn't feature an exceptionally ceremonious send-off for the castaways of the titular island. Instead, it played out largely like any other, with one of the few notable exceptions being the fact that it was the only episode to feature all of the male castaways in drag. In the episode, Gilligan is toiling away on a project on the beach at the lagoon when a native chief by the name of King Kalawani sails ashore and begins talking about picking a bride out of one of the show's female castaways. The castaways are initially wary of King Kalawani, but they warm up to the idea of continuing communications when the character of the professor finds a lighter aboard the boat that the native chief used to sail ashore. They quickly realize the presence of this lighter means King Kalawani has contact with the outside world, and that means he can possibly get them rescued. After learning King Kalawani has contact with the outside world, the female castaways then begin trying to seduce him. But they decide they aren't that anxious to become the chief's wife once they realize that the wife's fate is to be tossed into a volcano. The male castaways attempt to defend the female castaways by standing their ground against the native chief and his minions, but the natives prove too strong. Realizing they're going to have to give the native chief what he wants, the male castaways then all dress up in drag in an attempt to trick the native chief into choosing one of them. Gilligan proves to be the only male castaway who can successfully pass as a woman, meaning he has to be the one to go off with the chief. With the new name of Gilliana, Gilligan goes off to be the new bride. The native chief proves so taken by his new bride he decides he'd rather keep Gilliana for himself than throw her into the volcano. Fearing his future as the bride of the native chief, Gilligan eventually manages to escape, leaving his female disguise where King Kalawani can find it. Upon seeing the disguise, King Kalawani becomes convinced that the gods have taken his new bride forcefully. Of course, this has occurred as a result of the native chief refusing to sacrifice her. Because of that, he and his minions decide to run away from the island, fearing further retribution. As they're heading out to sea, Mr. Howell pleads with them from ashore to come back, and this scene ended up being the very last of the original show. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like, and subscribe to Facts First for more, and stick around for more about the last scene of Gilligan's Island. Gilligan the Goddess ended up being the last episode of Gilligan's Island's original run, much to the chagrin and surprise of the show's creative team. The show had been a massive hit until that point, and had just been given a new time slot and the promise of a 4th season. But this didn't end up coming to fruition, for a decidedly unfair reason. The new time slot given to Gilligan's Island had been the time slot of the Western series Gunsmoke, which had just been canceled by CBS after 12 seasons. But the executive who made the decision to cancel Gunsmoke was unaware it was one of his wife's favorite shows. The head of the network's wife had been on vacation when Gunsmoke was canceled, and she was not at all happy when she came back to realize one of her favorite Western series had been taken off the air. Gunsmoke was subsequently brought back, and Gilligan's Island was put to an end to make room for it. After the debacle involving Gunsmoke and Gilligan's Island, Gunsmoke went on to last for another 8 seasons, while Gilligan's Island came to an end. Gunsmoke had arguably worn out its promise already and then some by the time of Gilligan's Island's cancellation, whereas Gilligan's Island still had plenty of steam left. The creative team of Gilligan's Island had high hopes for the series' 4th season. Fans have always speculated what could have been if the CBS executives had stayed true to their guns and allowed Gilligan's Island to stay on the air instead of Gunsmoke. Before it was revived in the form of various made-for-TV features starting in 1978, it was adapted into a Saturday morning cartoon series in 1974. The series was called The New Adventures of Gilligan, but it has never been considered to be canon in relation to the original show and subsequent reunion features. Instead, the first canon continuation of the original was 1978's Rescue from Gilligan's Island, which was then preceded by such subsequent features as 1979's The Castaways on Gilligan's Island and 1981's The Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island. In '82, Gilligan's Island inspired a second animated series, this time in space. A Saturday morning cartoon series called Gilligan's Planet premiered that year, though it only lasted for one season of 13 episodes. It was perhaps most notable for being the last Saturday morning cartoon series produced by legendary animation studio Filmation. Gilligan's Island has continued to live on in the hearts and minds of TV audiences, even outside of the reunion features and animated series. Sherwood Schwartz claimed he came up with the idea for the show after being asked during his high school years what items he would take with him on a deserted island. Sherwood reportedly received the prompt as part of a public speaking class, and it stuck with him. When it came time to pitch Gilligan's Island to the networks, Sherwood also saw the concept's value as a satire relating to class and politics. The concept of Gilligan's Island sees several people from largely different walks of life being forced to live together on a deserted island. These people normally wouldn't interact in the real world, but are forced to make things work as a team due to their unique circumstances. Through the interactions of these drastically different classes of people, the television audience was able to get some commentary about major issues of the time. CBS wasn't initially all that excited about Sherwood's concept, but ended up showing a pilot for Gilligan's Island to several test audiences who ate it up. They realized they had a potential hit on their hand. The pilot featured some characters played by different actors and also some different characters. Gilligan's Island was originally filmed on location in Malibu, but fog made filming impossible. Because of this, it was moved to a set that was constructed on the CBS lot. Even after filming was moved there, it was said that the water of the lagoon set could often get so cold during the winter that Bob Denver had to wear a wetsuit under his normal outfit. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you know Gilligan's Island was taken off the air to make room for Gunsmoke? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.